What does it mean to fail a background check? And what do you do if you think a job candidate may be disqualified from being hired because of the results of a background check? Hi, I'm Nick at Checkr. Most businesses conduct background checks to help them make informed hiring decisions and meet requirements for their industry or region. A lot of the time, background checks are completed without incident. You order the screenings, everything comes back looking good, and the candidate moves through to the next phase of hiring. But what about when a background check returns unexpected results? How do you know what should trigger extra consideration from your team to assess a candidate's eligibility for a role? I'm here to walk you through it. What can make someone fail a background check? What happens if a candidate fails a background check after a job offer is already extended or earlier in the hiring process? And some general requirements for assessing a candidate and completing the adverse action process if you decide not to hire someone because of a background check result. First off, I want to mention that at Checkr, we don't typically use pass or fail language in regard to background checks. As part of our mission to promote fair chance hiring, we help employers consider relevant information in a background check using assessment tools that reduce bias and encourage fair hiring practices. However, we know that many people do use these terms and have questions about how to proceed when a background check requires a more in-depth review. So, what are the reasons why a job candidate would fail a background check, or in other words, be disqualified from being hired based on the results of a background check? Let's look at some of the common ones. There are items in their criminal record that you believe are relevant to the position they're applying for, or disqualifiers for employment in your industry by law. Or maybe you found a discrepancy between the employment history provided by a candidate and the information returned in an employment verification background screening. The same can be said for failing an education verification screening, where the education information provided by the candidate, such as schools attended or degrees earned, was unable to be verified. In these cases, missing educational credentials or professional experience could make a candidate ineligible for a role. Candidates could also be disqualified for employment based on something found in a driving record check. If a position requires operating a vehicle, certain violations, suspensions, or other incidents in their driving record could result in ineligibility based on industry compliance requirements or company policy. And finally, some employers may ask candidates to participate in pre-employment drug testing. If specific substances are present in a candidate's drug screening results, they could be ineligible for employment. So what do you do when unexpected information like this appears in a background check? And how do you know if that information can or should influence the decision to extend a job offer? While any of the reasons for failing a background check that we just mentioned could, in some situations, result in a candidate being disqualified from employment, there are laws that dictate how and when background check screenings may influence hiring decisions. Your first priority should always be legal compliance with the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act, also called FCRA, and any relevant state or local hiring laws. If you believe a background check may disqualify a candidate from being hired, think about these 5 steps. Step 1. Consult your company's background check policy. A written background check policy helps you conduct and evaluate fair, consistent background checks across your hiring team. When creating your policy, consult your legal counsel to ensure it's up to date with current compliance regulations. You may also want to keep in mind that the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission recommends using individualized assessments in cases where background check information, especially criminal record information, requires further review before hiring. This means that instead of establishing blanket policies about certain types of records that could over-exclude candidates and limit your hiring pool, you should consider the unique context and circumstances of each case before making a decision. Providing adjudication guidelines for your team and your policy can also speed up the hiring process and help you reduce bias. If you work with a background check service like Checkr, you can build customized adjudication workflows that align with your background check policy and make it easier to maintain compliance. Okay, so if after consulting your company policy and assessing a report according to its guidelines, you determine a candidate may be ineligible for employment, then move on to step 2. Send a pre-adverse action notice. Before taking any adverse action against a job candidate, the FCRA requires that employers send a written notice containing an explanation of the information from a background check that's being cited as a reason for disqualification. This notice should also contain a copy of their background check and a summary of their rights under the FCRA, as well as other applicable state or local disclosures. Next, you'll need to allow the candidate time to respond. The FCRA also requires a waiting period after this initial notice to allow a candidate to dispute the results of a background check or respond with additional context. Fair hiring laws in some jurisdictions may include a specific amount of time for this step, which typically falls between 5 and 10 business days. Some background check providers, like Checkr, offer easy avenues for candidates to share their stories or dispute report inaccuracies through a dedicated portal without needing to call your team at all. Once you've heard from the candidate or the allotted time for response has passed, then move on to step 4, making a hiring decision. Now that the candidate has had the opportunity to provide you with more context or information about their history, it's time to consult your background check policy again and review any new insights you've gained alongside their background check report. At this point, if you conclude that a candidate is not eligible for position, move on to the last step. Send a final adverse action notice. Federal and certain state laws require that you inform the candidate in writing of the reasons for your decision and their right to dispute it. Best practice is to keep copies of this notice and any attachments or responses in your records for future reference. Remember that both candidates and employers often have questions about what happens when you fail a background check. As we've reviewed in this video, there isn't one simple answer, and a background check adjudication can be a complex process. To see how a background check service like Checkr can help make adjudication, candidate communication, and compliance easier with modern background check technology, visit Checkr.com and get started running your first check or set up time to connect with our team.